So we've talked about the fact that slope and rate of change are synonymous. We know that the rate of change is the same thing as change of y over change of x, and this is also the same thing as slope. And it makes sense when you look at the slope formula, which is a way of getting and calculating slope, that the change of y is the difference between the two y's. And the change of x is the difference between the two x's. Think of the idea of change, the difference between y and x. x1 and y1 are considered the first point. x2 and y2 are considered the second point. So these little subscripts are just positional. In other words, they just tell you who's with who, what point is he, point 1, point 2, as opposed to exponents. They are not exponents. So if I ask you to find the slope of a line that passes through the 2 points given, that's the same thing as saying finding the slope of a line that contains them. And so my first point, this is point number 1, we would then say that x1, y1, and this is x2, y2. What we're looking to do is, if we were to graph these 2 points, we'd be looking to see what the rate of change is, what the slope is. Going back to rate of change, remember it's the difference of y's over the difference of x's. And so what you do is you literally subtract it. And so the difference of y's over difference of x's, if we plugged it into the equation, if our equation is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, we're going to plug y2, so that's 2, minus y1, which is negative 2. Be very careful with your parentheses. It is y2 minus y1. So when you subtract negative 2, because that is the value of y2, negative 2, this becomes a positive over x2, which is my negative 1, minus x1, which is 4. And you get 2 plus 2, which is 4, over negative 1 minus 4, which is negative 5. That slope is considered to be negative 4/5. Just as a quick aside, as a reminder in rules, if I had a number like 8 and I divided it by negative 4, that's going to give me the value of negative 2. If I have negative 8 and I'm dividing it by positive 4, that's also going to give me the value of negative 2. And even if I had the negative of 8 divided by 4, that's going to give me the value of negative 2. This is the reason to why if only one of them is negative, the whole value is negative. And with that, I refer to this kind of problem where we just did, where you get something on the lines of 4 divided by negative 5 or 4 over negative 5. That's the same thing as saying, and the more standard way of saying it would be negative 4/5. That's the slope. That means that the slope is decreasing from left to right. If I was to get an idea of which direction this line went, it would look something like this, because from left to right, it's decreasing. Okay, let's look at the next one. Now they're giving me a graph, and it shows me that this graph shows a linear relationship, and I could tell because I'm looking at it and it looks like a line. And it wants me to find the slope using the slope formula. Now, the slope of a line is the change of y over the change of x. It's how much you're changing vertically, because that's what the y value represents, the up and down movement. The numerator is the vertical movement, which is what we refer to as the rise, and the denominator is the horizontal movement, which we refer to as the run. They want me to use the slope formula. So instead of using this rise over run, I'm going to literally plug in to the equation y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. My very first point is this one. That means x1 is equal to -2 and y1 is equal to -1. So when I go to plug in y1 and x1, I'm going to make sure that I'm plugging them into this location. The second point is 2, 2. That means x2 is 2 and y2 is also 2 because of the location. And then when I go to plug these in, y2 is going to be equal to 2. So it's going to be y2 minus, and now look at your y1. Your y1 is -1. So it's y2, which is 2, minus -1 over x2, which is 2, minus x1, which is -2. Minusing a minus becomes a plus, so the numerator is now 3. And same thing here, plus 4. So the slope is 3. So the slope is 3 over 4. Okay, example B, it would like for us to find the slope of that relation, of that function, that linear function that we're looking at right there. It wants us to find the slope using any 2 points from the table. So you could choose any 2 points you would like. I'm going to choose the 2 middle ones. The change of y, I went up by 2, and the change of x here, that change of x, that's interesting, you went up by 0. So the change of y is 2 and the change of x is 0. Well, 2 divided by 0 is undefined. Anything divided by 0 is undefined. So this must be a vertical line. And if you think about it, if I was to graph all of these points, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 5, that's a vertical line. So I realized by looking at this that even though it is a line, it's not a function. If I would have used the slope formula, I would have done y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You could have very easily chosen points 1 and 2 as these 2 points, 2, 0 and 2, 1. And y2 is 1 minus y1 is 0 divided by x2 minus x1, and you would have gotten 1 over 0, which is also undefined. So if you recognize by looking at the table of values that the domains are repeating, then you know that it is undefined. Fourths. Okay, let's look at the real world app. The graph shows how much water is in a reservoir at different times. Find the slope of the line and tell what the slope represents. So as I look at this, I see 2 specific points on that line, and I see that from left to right it's going down. So this must be decreasing. It's negative slope. And we are measuring the amount of water over time. Water depends on time. So as time is increasing, water is decreasing in the reservoir. So I already know that the slope represents that the water is decreasing over time. Now let's look at the slope formula. we're going to use our y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. At this point, some of you may wonder, well, does it matter what order you subtract? And it does, as long as you're consistent. You can actually choose which point you want to be the first point or the second one. Let's say I said this is x1 and y1, and I said this was x2 and y2, and you chose the other way around. You said this was x1 and y1, and that this was x2 and y2. We would get the same exact answer as long as you're consistent. And by consistent, I mean if you subtract this y, let me just erase these real quick. And so we have the 2 points. If we were to use our slope formula, we would say y2, which is 2,000, minus y1, which is 3,000, goes here, over x2. So consistency means if you began with this one and you said that this specific value is y2, then you have to say that its corresponding value is the x2. And if this is y1, then this has to be x1. So y2 is 60 minus y1, which is 20. And we go ahead and do our math. And we get 2,000 minus 3,000 is negative 1,000 over 60 minus 20 is 40. Always simplify. Remember, you could simplify by dividing by 10, which basically just divides a 0 away. And negative 100 over 4 is really negative 25 over 1. That means the slope is negative 25, which means that for every hour, negative 25 over 1, remember change of y over change of x, y represents water in thousands. You're losing 25,000 cubic feet per 1 hour. So there's a reason to why it's change of y over change of x, because the change of y represents the dependent variable. It's the amount that is changing for every independent. So here it's the amount of water lost for every hour. Okay. The next example, they would like for us to find the slope of a line described by 6x minus 5y equals 30. Well, hopefully you recall that this is standard form. ax plus by is equal to c. When an equation is in standard form, in order to figure out all of the unknowns, first of all, for x-intercept, we remember that x-intercept is the value of x when y is equal to 0. Y-intercept is the value of y when x is equal to 0. And so when I go ahead and do my y and x intercepts, I'm going to take my equation, and I want to know what is x equal to when y is equal to 0, and I literally plug it in. And again, this is the equation 6x minus 5y equals 30. 6x minus 5y is equal to 30. Your x-intercept is when y is equal to 0, so I plug 0 into y. That just leaves me with 6x is equal to 30. Divide by 6 on both sides. X is 5. So the x-intercept is 5, 0. The y-intercept is the value of y when x is equal to 0. So I am going to 6 times x, 0, minus 5y is equal to 30. 6 times 0 is just 0. Negative 5y is equal to 30. I divide by negative 5, and I get that y is equal to negative 6. So my y-intercept is 0, because x has to be 0, comma, negative 6. the slope formula, they want me to use the slope formula to find the slope. Well, now I have the 2 points. If you have your 2 points, you can use the slope formula because the slope formula requires 2 points. And so when you have an equation, it's easy to find the x and y intercepts because of the easy 0 that you plug in. And then once you have 2 points, you have x1 and y1, and you use the slope formula. So you're going to have y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We have this value is x1 and y1, and this one is x2 and y2. So when we plug in, y2 is negative 6 minus y1 is 0 over, and x2 is 0 minus x1, which is 5. And when we do the calculation, negative 6 minus 0 is negative 6. 0 minus 5, sorry about the bell girls and guys, is negative 5. 0 minus 5 is negative 5. And negative 6 over negative 5 is really negative 6, positive 6 fifths. Sorry about that. So this negative 6 over negative 5 becomes positive 6 fifths. So the slope is 6 fifths. And you leave it as a fraction, not as an improper fraction. I'm sorry, not as a mixed number. You leave it as a fraction because you want to be able to see the change of y over the change of x. All right, so the next stuff you're going to be doing, work the independent practice, finding the slope of the line, 3,000. Remember to use y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Remember that you can look at the slope of a line by counting the rise and the run. You always run to the right, or just using the 2 points and plugging it into the slope formula. See you guys tomorrow. For these last 3 questions, I want to make sure you understand that what you can do to find the slope of a line, if it is in in ax plus by equals c form, if it's in standard form, you can either get the 2 points that are the intercepts and then use those 2 points to find the slope, or you can transform it into y equals mx plus b format. Because if you have that, then you'll be able to see what the m is. Let's look at number 8, for example. To transform this into y equals mx plus b, I might subtract 8x from both sides. And I get 2y is equal to negative 8x plus 96. Now I divide everything by 2. Whatever you do to one, you do to all. And you get y is equal to negative 4x plus 48. So that means that the slope is equal to negative 4. So go ahead and try these other ones that way, transforming it into y equals mx plus b. See you guys tomorrow.